There's a country in the southern tip of Africa that basically runs on diamonds. And behind almost every diamond that ever left that country, there was one family. Not a government, not a corporation, a family. The Oppenheimers didn't just get rich off South Africa. They built it. They decided who worked, who didn't, what the land was worth, and how much a diamond cost anywhere on the planet. At their peak, they controlled over 80% of the world's rough diamond supply, 80% from a single private company that answered to no one but them. That's not a business, that's a kingdom. And the craziest part, most people have never heard the name Oppenheimer. They've heard of De Beers, they've heard a diamond is forever, but they have no idea who was pulling the strings behind that slogan, behind that empire, behind that country. Stay until the end. The last chapter reveals how they quietly exited one of the most powerful monopolies in history and walked away with more money than most nations will ever see. It might be the most calculated move a family has ever made. What city are you watching from? Write it in the comments. And if you're new here, subscribe, like, and share this video. It helps a lot more than you can imagine. The man who arrived with nothing, he stepped off a boat in South Africa in 1902 with 40 pounds in his pocket. 40 pounds, that's roughly $6,000 today. Enough for a few months of rent. Not enough to build a dynasty. Ernest Oppenheimer was 22 years old, worked for a diamond broker, and had zero connections in a country he'd never set foot in before. But he noticed something that everyone else missed. The diamond mines in Kimberley were chaotic. Dozens of small operators. No coordination. Prices all over the place. Ernest didn't see a mess. He saw an opportunity wrapped in disorder. If someone could bring all of that under one roof, control the supply, control the price, they wouldn't just be rich, they'd be untouchable. It took him 16 years to make his first real move. 16 years of learning, building relationships, buying small stakes, and waiting. Most people would have given up. Ernest was just getting started. And what he built next would make De Beers, the company that already existed, look like a corner store. A hostile takeover not one saw coming. 1917. Ernest Oppenheimer founded Anglo-American Corporation with backing from American financiers, including J.P. Morgan's network. Let that sink in. He was a diamond broker's assistant less than 2 decades earlier. Anglo-American started in gold. South Africa's Witwatersrand goldfields were producing enormous wealth, but Ernest had bigger plans. He wanted diamonds. Specifically, he wanted De Beers, the dominant diamond company founded by Cecil Rhodes decades before. Here's where it gets surgical. Ernest didn't attack De Beers. He didn't undercut them or start a price war. He quietly bought shares, year after year, building influence from the inside, while everyone assumed he was just another investor. By 1929, he had enough control to get himself appointed chairman. He took over De Beers from the inside. No hostile press, no public battle, just patience, capital, and an absolutely cold-blooded long game. The board didn't see it coming until it was already done. Ernest Oppenheimer was now in control of the most powerful diamond operation on Earth, and he was just getting started. Controlling the price of desire. Here's something that will permanently change how you look at diamonds. Diamonds are not rare. They never were. Ernest Oppenheimer understood this better than anyone alive. The moment supply hits the open market without control, prices collapse. A diamond becomes worth what it actually costs to pull out of the ground, which is much, much less than what you paid for your engagement ring. So he built a system. The Central Selling Organization, the CSO, was essentially a global chokehold on diamond supply. Mines in South Africa, Namibia, Botswana, Angola, all funneled through one pipeline. Oppenheimer decided how many diamonds reached the market each year. Not the mines, not the governments. When the Great Depression hit and demand collapsed, he stockpiled diamonds rather than drop prices. That's the move. That's the genius and the ruthlessness in one decision. He absorbed billions in potential losses in the short term to protect the long-term illusion that diamonds are precious. And it worked. The price held. The myth survived. A diamond is forever because he decided it would be. Building a country inside a country. By the 1940s, Anglo-American and De Beers together didn't just dominate diamonds and gold. They ran South Africa. Think about what that actually means. They owned the mines that employed hundreds of thousands of workers. They controlled the banks that financed the infrastructure. They built the railways, the housing compounds, the company stores, and mining towns across the country. The Oppenheimer empire was the employer, the landlord, the grocer, and the bank all at once. Workers, overwhelmingly black South African men, lived in company compounds, bought food from company stores, and had almost zero ability to negotiate wages or conditions. This chapter doesn't get a pass just because it was the way things were done. It was a system designed for maximum extraction at minimum cost. Ernest built an empire that happened to benefit enormously from apartheid-era labor policies, even as the family would later distance themselves from that legacy. The wealth was real. The human cost was also real. Both things are true at the same time. And the family that inherited all of this had a choice to make about what to do with it. The son who inherited an empire, Ernest, died in 1957. His son Harry Oppenheimer took over. Harry was different, quieter, more political, more aware of how the world was beginning to look at South Africa. Where Ernest was a builder, Harry was a diplomat. He publicly opposed apartheid at a time when almost no major South African business figure did. He funded opposition politicians. He pushed carefully, strategically, for reform from inside the system he benefited from enormously. Was he a hero? That's too simple. Was he a hypocrite? Also too simple. Harry Oppenheimer ran a company that paid black workers a fraction of what white workers earned for the same labor, while simultaneously lobbying against the government that made those rules. He held the contradictions of the entire country inside one biography. But here's what's undeniable. Under Harry, the empire grew. Anglo-American expanded across the continent, into North America, into Europe. The Oppenheimer name became synonymous not just with diamonds, but with African capitalism itself. He turned a monopoly into a multinational, and he handed it to his son Nicholas, in better shape than he found it. The diamond monopoly starts to crack for most of the 20th century. De Beers controlled the game completely. Then came the 90s. Russia had been secretly stockpiling diamonds for decades, Soviet-era production that never went through the CSO pipeline. When the Soviet Union collapsed, those stones started hitting the market. Canada discovered massive diamond deposits and wanted no part of the Oppenheimer system. Australia's Argyle mine, one of the world's largest, walked away from the De Beers contract entirely. The monopoly was bleeding from every direction. And then came something De Beers had never faced before: the United States Department of Justice. For years, De Beers executives couldn't even land in America without risking arrest. They were under active antitrust investigation for price fixing. The company that sold diamonds to the world literally could not do business on American soil. For any other company, this would have been the beginning of the end. But the Oppenheimers didn't panic. They adapted. And the adaptation they chose was so precise, so deliberate. It looked less like a business decision and more like a chess move 10 years in the making. The reinvention, 2004. De Beers pleaded guilty to price-fixing charges in the United States, paid a fine of $10 million, and finally, after decades, could legally operate in America. $10 million. For a company worth tens of billions. That's less than a rounding error. The Oppenheimers restructured De Beers from a supply-controlling monolith into a luxury brand. They launched De Beers retail stores. They created the Forever Mark diamond certification. They positioned De Beers not as the company that controlled diamonds, but as the company that defined them. It was a masterclass in rebranding under pressure. Instead of fighting the new reality, more supply, more competition, more scrutiny, they leaned into the one thing no competitor could steal: the name. 100 years of marketing. A diamond is forever. The emotional architecture of an entire industry, built brick by brick. Since Ernest stepped off that boat, they didn't defend the monopoly. They turned the monopoly's ghost into a brand worth billions. And then they did something nobody saw coming. The exit. 2012. The Oppenheimer family sold their entire stake in De Beers to mining giant Anglo-American for $5.1 billion. $5.1 billion in a single transaction. They walked away from the company their family had controlled for over 80 years. The company Ernest had taken over from the inside. The company that had, for most of the 20th century, decided what a diamond was worth anywhere on Earth. They just left. Why? Think about it. Lab-grown diamonds were getting better and cheaper every year. The ethical sourcing movement was gaining real momentum. Blood diamonds wasn't just a movie title anymore. The leverage the family once had over global supply was eroding faster than they could plug the holes. They saw the peak, and they sold at the peak. Most founders hold on too long. They fall in love with what they built. The Oppenheimers looked at $5.1 billion on one side of the scale, and a slowly weakening empire on the other, and made the coldest, clearest decision imaginable. They cashed out, and they smiled. What $5 billion becomes? Here's where most family dynasties fall apart. You sell the crown jewel. The heirs fight over the money. The fortune splinters across 3 generations and disappears into bad investments, expensive divorces, and people who never had to build anything. Not the Oppenheimers. Nicky Oppenheim, Ernest's grandson, took the $5.1 billion and built Fireblade Aviation, invested in African tech startups, funded conservation projects across the continent, and systematically diversified into assets that don't depend on a single commodity. He turned a diamond fortune into a diversified family office that operates more like a sovereign wealth fund than a personal bank account. And here's the number that puts it all in perspective. The Oppenheimer family's estimated net worth today sits at around $8 billion, meaning the fortune has grown since the sale, not shrunk. They sold the asset, kept the capital, and compounded it. Ernest came off that boat with 40 pounds. His family is now worth $8 billion. That's not luck. That's a philosophy passed down through 4 generations. Buy, control, expand, and when the time comes, walk away clean. The lesson nobody talks about. So what do you actually take from this? The Oppenheimer story isn't a fairy tale. It's not a villain's story either. It's something much more uncomfortable, a portrait of how power actually works when it compounds across generations. Ernest didn't just build a business, he built a system that controlled supply, shaped demand, and rewired an entire continent around one family's interests. He understood something that most people never do, that the real power isn't in the product, it's in the pipeline. Control what moves, and you control everything that moves through it. Harry understood that survival requires political intelligence, not just financial intelligence. Nicky understood that the smartest exit is the one you make before everyone else realizes it's time to leave. 3 men, 4 generations, 1 continuous thesis: position, control, adapt, exit. Do you think the Oppenheimers were visionary builders or ruthless monopolists who got out before the bill came due? Write it in the comments. I genuinely read every single one. If you want to see how another dynasty built and then lost an empire just as large. Next video, we're going inside the family that turned oil into a religion and almost took down a government doing it. You don't want to miss that one. Subscribe so you don't. See you in the next one.